Thank you, everyone who is tuning in and choosing to make prioritized time in your day for accessibility. Because at the end of the day, these are people's lives, and we work so hard to create good copy and good content, right? What we want is to make sure that everyone gets access to it with and without disabilities. So, really excited to be here. What we'd like to cover today is really why this matters. Why does digital accessibility matter? I want to help make sure that everyone on this call understands the ADA 2026 compliance requirements, understands those deadlines, what it means, what it doesn't mean. And then we're going to go over some practical steps and tools to get you started, especially as government communicators for things like just general communication and social media. And as we get started, I always like to level set. And so, digital accessibility, according to the Georgetown University School of Law, is simply a practice that is inclusive and includes removing barriers that are preventing people with disabilities from accessing something electronic, a website, a digital tool, or a technology. It's also the practice of proactively creating environments and content that does not include those barriers from the beginning. So that's really what we're talking about. We're removing barriers that have been in place in many cases for decades that we simply did not know existed, and creating environments without those barriers so that everyone gets access. And especially in this current, post-COVID day and age where we do everything online and so much communication has shifted towards things like social media platforms and other forms of digital communication, making sure that what we have to say, the important information and message that we're conveying, is available for everyone could not be more important. So let's make sure we understand what the law says. So in April of 2024, an update to Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Now, Title II covers public entities. So any entity that receives federal funding, so government entities, public schools, so public K-12 areas, public colleges and universities, public libraries, public parks and recs, anybody receiving federal funding falls under Title II and is a Title II institution or entity. And Title II was updated. So nothing that was already there was changed. It was just added to. And that was signed into law on April 24th of 2024. And it's the first time that digital accessibility is now a proactive requirement on such a large reaching scale. Before that, for strictly government entities, we had Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act, which speaks to WCAG 2.0. However, now what we have supersedes all of that. The purpose was to ensure the accessibility of web content and mobile applications for people with disabilities. This is proactive, not reactive, which means that we need to pay attention to those deadlines so that we know when we must be in compliance. And the deadlines were 2 to 3 years, respectively, depending on your population. So, why is digital accessibility important for government offices and entities? It's important, I mentioned, because these are people's lives. But how do we understand what we need to do in the context and how we need to do it? So, if you are a Title II entity and you serve a population, and we're going to talk about how it works. Actually, I'm going to wait for this slide for just a moment. So if you serve a census population, so the most recent decennial census was that your population of your entity is 50,000 people or more. That means the number of people you serve. So, for example, if I was Cecil County Library, I'm a public entity. Cecil County is a county in Maryland, where my parents live. I happen to know that Cecil County, as a population, the most recent census has far more than 50,000 people in it. So the Cecil County Library, which serves the population of Cecil County, would be under the first or closest deadline, that 2 year deadline that began April 24th, 2024 and ends April 24th of this year, 2026. So about a month and about a week from right now. Now, if I were in a smaller geographic location and government overseen area. So let's say I was a different county, and my county that I was a library in has a population of 38,000 people based on the last decennial census. That's less than 50,000. That means I have a 3 year deadline. So the deadline started for me, just like everyone else, on April 24th of 2024, and it goes until April 26th of 2027. So 1 year, 1 year, 1 month, and 1 week, roughly, from right now. Um, and I'm happy to give some detail about that in a little bit if needed. But let's first talk about who it is that we serve. In the United States, in the last decennial census, 43 million Americans identified as being a person with a disability. Those were only the ones that identified in the census, which means that is the best quality of data that we can get. In education in this country, in higher education, 19% of all undergraduate students and 12% of all graduate students identify to their institution that they have a disability. Think about that. Almost 20% of every undergraduate class. 446 million people in the world identify as being deaf or hard of hearing. Um, we had just a mention a moment ago of individuals who are colorblind. Ben mentioned that his dad was colorblind. 1 in 10 men in this world are colorblind, and 1 in 200 women. Many people don't know that they're colorblind. You're in elementary school and they hand you a card and it has a red apple on it and they say, "This is red." Well, when someone's colorblind, usually it's not that they don't see color at all. That is possible. Some people only see in shades of black, white, and gray. But many people see color, but it's more like a color weakness. So they may have trouble perceiving the differences between certain colors, like red and blue, or green or yellow. And so in their mind's eye, those colors actually look different. But if I'm handed a card and it has an apple on it, and I'm told that whatever that color looks like to me is red, then that's red. And that's how I learn what red is, even if what I see in my mind's eye is not what other people are seeing. So many people don't even realize that they have color weakness or color blindness. And then something that is always really important to remember is that disability is visible and invisible. So while digital accessibility certainly is essential for individuals who may be blind or have low vision, or someone who may be deaf or hard of hearing, it is just as essential for individuals with learning disabilities, individuals with attentional disorders, ADD, ADHD, with some psychological impairments that affect how they focus, chronic health conditions that can affect focus, or how someone's body functions, the use of limbs. They are essential. Having digitally accessible content is essential for all of those individuals. And in this world, 2.5 billion, that's billion with a B, people use assistive technology. That doesn't mean that all 2.5 of them have disabilities, because really only 1.2 billion people in the world identify as having a disability. But 2.5 billion use assistive technology. Why does that matter? I could have the best assistive technology in the world on the planet, and it is still only as good as the quality of the content that I am trying to access. So if I have the best screen reader and I am trying to read these social media posts, if the social media post doesn't have alternative text behind that image, or has poor alternative text, my screen reader could be top of the line, and I still don't know what's in that image. And I still haven't gotten the same information as my peers. Access is also both a human right, and in this country, it's a civil right. Um, Disability rights were added to the Civil Rights Act in 1973. It was passed in 64, so 9 years later, it was added. So disability rights truly are civil rights in this country, and they're human rights. Access is a human thing. When we create accessible content, websites, apps, materials, documents, online posts, we ensure that everyone has a voice that's heard. We ensure more diversity, more inclusion, and higher levels of participation and engagement with what we are doing, whether the person has a disability or not. We promote and uphold equal opportunities for everyone. This makes the difference between someone being able to apply for a job or get food assistance or housing assistance or simply sign up their kid for soccer practice, being able to order your groceries online or remember that it's time to register to vote. These things are essential to life. And when we make sure that they're accessible, they're available for everyone. There's a phrase that I use. I can't take full credit for it. I developed it with some colleagues at a university where I used to work, and that's wired. And wired for me is welcoming, inclusive, respectful, engaging, and diverse. I'm going to say that one more time. Welcoming, inclusive, respectful, engaging, and diverse. And don't we all want to live in, work in, learn in, participate in, be in community in a location or a digital environment that is wired? Um, so, what's an example of digital accessibility? So, here's an outreach example. We want to connect with you. How regular is this, right? I want to know the best way to communicate with the community that I serve. So, which of the following options would you prefer that we use? This is like a survey that you might send out to your own community. So there's two options on the next slide, and I'd like for you to please select, you can even put it in the chat if you'd like, which of these options you feel is the best way to communicate with you. Option A or option B? So this is a trick and not a trick.
And I
Yes,
don't know how to answer this.
right? Good. That's the point. Because visually, I'm a sighted person. So visually, it looks like two equally sized black boxes. This is exactly the experience that someone who is blind or has a visual impairment or low vision has when you give them two options that are visual only that have no alternative text behind them. And so in this example, what a sighted person would have gotten from your Facebook feed, if we use that exact example, would have been this questionnaire. Option A, we've got a pair of hands holding a smartphone. Smartphone is pointing up at the person, and there's the text message. Option B, there is a pair of hands typing on a laptop computer keyboard, and then superimposed over that, we've got an envelope and some unanimous people icons around, and there's a text that says email. As a sighted person, I am going to pick personally option A every single time. Please text me. It's the best way to get me. But for that young man who you interviewed, or for anyone else who has low vision or is blind, they had the option before. And what their screen reader would say to them is figure, no alternative text exists, or figure blank. And then it would say option B, figure blank. So how do we avoid that, right? Because we don't know what we don't know. And that's the point. So, had we started out with access, when we upload those images into our social media feed, we have an option to add alt text. Alt text is a descriptive text, usually no more than 2 to 4 sentences in length, that talks about the content of the image in the context that it is being used. That description helps me remember because then I'm not putting in extraneous information, right? I don't need it to be a whole bunch of stuff that isn't relevant. What would I want any other user to get from looking at that picture? Well, for option A, which was the text message option, person holding a mobile device with the screen facing them and text message overlaid on the image. It literally could even just say text message. And that would still have been sufficient. Option B, person typing on a keyboard with a male icon graphic surrounded by anonymous user icons connected in a web, accompanied by the text email overlaid onto the image. If that is what had read out loud, it would have said option A. And then it would have said a person holding a mobile device and read that description. And then it would have said option B and read that description out loud to that person. That person then could independently answer my poll, right? They could choose A or B, just like any other sighted user or any other user anywhere. They could do it on their own, without assistance, without having to ask for an accommodation, only and simply because I made it accessible to them. And especially for someone who needs digital accessibility, being able to answer a question just like this, how do I want you to communicate with me, is even more important because certain forms of communication are more accessible than others. So if I was in a document and I put in an image like that, I could easily right click on the image, choose View Alt Text, and then that alt text window is going to open up for me on the right-hand side of the page if I'm in Word or Google Docs or any other standard format document. I'm going to type in that description and I'm done. In social media, all images get descriptions, all of them. In a document, only informative images get descriptions. So if the image has information in it, whether it's a graph or a chart or a picture, and that information is not contained anywhere else in the document, then it must have alternative text. It must have that description. In a document, if the image itself is purely decorative, does not contain information, or the information in the image is already somewhere else in the document, then I can mark it as decorative. And there's that check mark box in the alternative text section. You may also notice in documents that you have an option that says generate alt text for me. Please do not use that option. Most document types have kind of an AI tool in this day and age built into them. And that AI tool goes and tries to look at the image and give you alternative text description. That text description is then usually exactly like the example that you used, woman standing next to a tree. It looks at well, maybe the content of the image, but the AI in those tools can't perceive context. So it would not be able to provide sufficient description. We want to make sure that what any sighted person in this example would get from looking at that image is exactly what any other user, sighted or otherwise, would get. Another example that I wanted to show. So we mentioned that digital accessibility is also really important for individuals who may have different types of learning disabilities. And so whenever I show this slide, I always preface it with these are examples of what some individuals with learning disabilities might see. I've worked in the disability community and with individuals with disabilities for about 20 years now. And I can tell you that I could have 10 people in front of me and they might all have the same diagnosis on paper, but all 10 of them will experience that diagnosis differently because everyone's brain works differently. So for some individuals, when they look at text in their mind's eye, it actually appears in what's called that swirls pattern. That's the first example that we see on the left-hand side. And it's as though you were to drop a drop of water in a still pond and those concentric circles that kind of come out from it. So in other words, the text at the very center of their gaze in their mind's eye is clear, but then everything around it is kind of swirled. So imagine trying to read anything when that is how your mind's eye interprets it. So try to read that, in context, for example. This is absolutely a scenario where someone may use reading software, not because they can't see and not because they can't read, but simply because their brain will work more effectively if they can see it and hear it at the same time. Because if they're just seeing it, they're dealing with what their mind's eye is showing them. The next example is called rivers. So literally in this person's mind's eye, their brain has squished the words and the letters together in interesting ways on the page to create white space that kind of runs almost like rivers down the page. So one way to help this not be as like effect as implementing or as much as a barrier is to make sure that we use left justified text whenever possible. Also, this is another example of when a person would use reading software. Because imagine trying to read in context, right? This does make sense. It's actual text. If you were to really zoom in, you would see that these are real words. However, it's difficult to read when you can't tell when one word starts and another begins. And then the last one is called coding, and it's similar to what we might think of if we think of something like dyslexia. Which, even though it's not part of the DSM anymore, it's where someone's brain exchanges letters with numbers or flips letters and numbers upside down or backwards and forwards. So, what this actually says is this message serves to prove how our minds can do amazing things, impressive things. In the beginning, it was hard, but now on this line, your mind is reading it automatically without even thinking about it. Um, I still can't read that very automatically, and I've done this many times. But in that person's mind's eye, that's what they would see. So, again, these are all examples of individuals who would use assistive technology almost all the time when they access anything electronic. Um, but they are someone who does not quote unquote look like they have a disability. However, this is something that they work through every single day. And they have just as much of a right to have independent access as anyone else. So, what about individuals without disabilities, or what things could affect multiple people? So, we have people in our own communities today who have inconsistent internet. Maybe they can't afford Wi Fi at home, or it just is spotty at best. Maybe it's a slower bandwidth. Maybe they don't have internet, so their internet access is at a library or is at a coffee shop, and they're kind of competing with the 27 other people in the coffee shop to get good signal. Maybe their only access to technology is their smartphone, and they can only use it when they have Wi-Fi connection because they don't have a data plan anymore. For any of those individuals, having digitally accessible material is essential. If I don't have a strong internet connection, if you've ever tried to load something either on a tablet or a phone or a laptop and you have a poor signal, and it's loaded but it's garbled, that is a key sign that that content was not made accessibly. Or if you've tried to load something and there's an image in it, and it loads, but it's a box with an X, and that's it. If there is no alternative text description, like the example that we just had a minute ago, that shows up automatically, then when they made that content, they did not make it accessibly. They didn't put alternative text in, but it would load if they had. So I don't have to even be a person with a disability to benefit from accessible content. What if I'm just someone who is not quite as tech savvy? I need things to work the first time. If I click it, I need it to do what it's supposed to do. What if I'm someone who has a ton of background distractions? Maybe I have 3 kids at home and 2 dogs, and it is kind of like World War III every afternoon when they get home. And I am trying to be online to be able to take advantage of a resource that's being offered in my community, but I got all this stuff going on behind me. The more accessible it is, the easier it is for me to stay focused too. Maybe I am watching a video, right? But it's the middle of the night, and I don't want to wake up my partner or the baby who is asleep. And so I'm watching it, but it's on silent, and there's no closed captions, or the closed captions aren't accurate. I am missing that information. What if my first language isn't English? Do you know how many people watch TV and videos and reels with captions on whose first language isn't English as a way to better learn the language? So many. And frankly, there was a statistic, and I think it was something like 78% of all people on Facebook watch reels with the sound off. I always watch it with the sound off, and I skip right past any of them that do not have good captions. Um, that's just how I tend to use my phone. So if we aren't thinking about access in those ways, then we are potentially blocking out an unknown number, a very high unknown number of our own community members. So, how do we understand those deadlines that I mentioned earlier? I talked about them from a broad sense, right? So that 50,000 people based on the most recent decennial census. If it's more than that, it's April 24 of this year. Less than that is April 20, 2027. But how does it break down even further? So it's based on the the type of organization that you are, right? Based on your timeline on the population and the jurisdiction. So if you are a municipal entity, then you use the population of the city or the town. If it's a county, then it's the population of the county. If it's regional or multi-jurisdictional, we're going to use the combined population of the jurisdictions that they serve. And if it's a special district or an independent government entity, then we're going to use the most recent official population estimate that's in the small area income and poverty estimates in the census. Um, I know that doesn't necessarily sound quite as direct since everything else is more straightforward, but that's how it's portioned out by the Department of Justice. So that's how it might break down, again, a little more clearly for your area, depending on the type of entity or the type of area and the type of population that you serve. So at the end of the day, what needs to be accessible? Um, and this is not an exhaustive list, but these are your big heavy hitters. Videos. They need to be accurately captioned. So how do I do that? I might have a YouTube channel, right? Maybe that's how I publish my videos. YouTube will auto caption things for you. Um, those auto captions are not sufficient to meet the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which are what are referenced in ADA Title II. No auto captions are sufficient. However, in a tool like YouTube or Teams or Zoom or WebEx, they will all auto caption or even Google Meet. And then they will allow you to go in and edit those captions, which is exactly what I recommend that you do. Let the tool do all the hard part. Let it get the bulk of the captioning done for you so that you only have to go in and edit. And when you edit, you're going to be looking at spelling, right? So let's make sure all those proper nouns are spelled the right way, that it caught the correct words. You're going to be looking at punctuation. Is the period where it's supposed to be? Should it really be a comma? Making sure that that is accurate. And if there is more than one speaker, you want to make sure that it introduces the speaker. In other words, it has their name when they begin speaking, each time they begin speaking. So those are the things you want to look for. If you open a YouTube video and you click the little CC button, it's usually in the bottom right-hand corner. If a message pops up that says captions are auto-generated, those captions do not meet the requirement. We want to make sure that our web page and app content can be navigated. One way to begin checking that, when you're on your website, can you tab through and get to everything that's a link or a heading in your website if you're just using tab on your keyboard? If not, or when you tab through, if it bounces you all over the place, then that means that the reading order is not accurate and needs to be fixed. In terms of other things to think about, when we have reels, usually you can capture, or they should be captioned kind of in and of themselves. You can, in certain social media settings or certain types of social media, you can put alternative text with a reel. So in other words, you can give a description of what's going on in the reel. Many times I've seen reels that have no audio. There is just stuff happening. Well, imagine that someone is blind. How would they know whatever important thing is happening in that reel? So when we create the reel, either we want to go ahead and organically make sure that there's spoken content in there. We could think about including a description track over it, but we want to think when I look at something that's recorded as a video, the first thing I do is watch it without looking at it, and I just listen. And then I watch it with the sound off, and I just watch. That's a real low tech way to figure out accessibility issues. Because if I had just listened to it and didn't watch it, what were my questions afterwards? Did anything not make sense? If I had just watched it but couldn't hear anything, then what were my questions? What things did I need both? And how can I add that back in? Images, charts, graphs need to be accessible. Third-party software and content. So ebooks or curriculum, if we use a third-party app for something. So let's say that all of the parking lots that someone would use to come to a municipal building are all paid lots. And so the government in that area uses the Park Mobile app. They have a contract with them, and that's how someone pays. And that's the only way to pay for parking is if you use the Park Mobile app. Well, and I don't know whether the Park Mobile app is accessible, so this is in no way shade on Park Mobile. But what if that app isn't accessible? I'm the one that's liable, even though it's not my app, even though I can't control it because I've required its use. Other things, hyperlinks, online learning management systems, social media posts all have to be accessible. Um, and I know we are going to be pressed for time, so I'm going to quickly go over there's 5 exceptions under ADA Title II for content that does not necessarily need to be accessible. So for archived web content, so this is not documents, it's actually on the web, HTML coded content. If it was there before your compliance date, and that information is only used for reference and research purposes. In other words, it is not active content. No one needs that information in order to get access to a program, good type of service. There is no instructions in there. It is just reference. Then that information on the web could be moved to somewhere else under a section that is labeled as archived and then would not need to be made accessible. However, it's important to note that we cannot change any of that content. The second we change it, it needs to be made accessible. And it can't be anything that's active use. If it's something that we would expect users to still need to interact with, look at, then it does need to be accessible. In that same vein, if it's a pre-existing electronic document, so same premise, the document has been online since before your compliance date, and it is not active use. It is only reference. So maybe it is the meeting minutes from a board meeting in 2020, March of 2020, right? That is only going to be used for reference. All of those documents can be moved to an archived section and labeled as archived, and then they do not need to be made accessible. The third one, content posted by a third party. Now you say, Anne, you just said that third party app, I'm still liable. Correct. In this case, the DOJ, the Department of Justice, means an independent third party. So let's say you have a place where online people could go and post like a forum. And I am just a citizen of the community, and maybe I attended a recent community event and I had such a good time. So I'm on that forum and I am posting pictures and I'm posting my comments about how wonderful it was. You did not ask me to post. You did not contract me to post or pay me to post. I am in no way obligated to do so on your behalf. I am choosing to do so as an independent person. In that case, you are not responsible for my post's accessibility. You're not responsible for making my, candid photos of the event accessible. In other words, you are responsible for making sure that message board where I'm posting, that tool itself is accessible. Any individualized documents like utility bills or bank statements, if it is a document, like a Word document, a PDF, something that is downloadable, and it is something that's hidden behind a password, so I have to log in order to see my electric bill, right? And then maybe my electric bill is a PDF document that I could download. Since it's an individualized document about one person or one account, it does not have to be made proactively accessible. If it was not a document, if I log in to see my electric bill and what I'm looking at is just website content on the web itself, then it does have to be accessible. And then pre-existing social media posts. If you made that post before your deadline, that post does not need to be retroactively made accessible. It's just everything social media from that day forward. Um, so, what small steps can we take to make a difference? Maya Angelou said, you do the best you can until you know better. And then when you know better, do better. And I think that really is the point. So some the most common gaps in accessibility in terms of government communications. Those are those uncaptioned videos or the inaccurate captions in videos, images without alternative text, documents or information that we posted without checking the accessibility. So to someone's point about using a PDF checking software, we want to make sure that we've checked before it goes online. And then also, lack of a digital accessibility action plan. You have to start somewhere. You have to kind of know where you are before you start making changes. Otherwise, we're throwing darts at a dartboard that we can't see, right? So, having an action plan, being able to identify where those strengths and weaknesses are, and kind of coming at them strategically and systematically mitigates risk, and gives you the most efficient and effective use of the resources that you have. So, what are some immediate access boosters that you can do? Let's make sure your videos are captioned. I talked about this. Let the software do most of the work for you and edit it afterwards. If you're someone who uses a script, fantastic. That script was probably once an electronic document. Take that, upload it with your video into the captions feed, and it'll make it its captions. In a video recorded thing, make sure that everything, whether it is sung, spoken, narrated, it's captioned. Um, Build your descriptions in organically, right? So that you don't have to come back later and do like a spoken description track. For example, if I am doing a video of a local pottery shop, and I'm, being recorded as I walk into the shop, I could open the door to the shop, walk in, kind of look around, and I look impressed. And then, the owner of the shop comes out and I say, "Oh, hi, Mr. Murphy. I'm here to take your pottery class." Well, there's so much description that got missed. Instead, what if when I'm being videoed, I walk in and I say, "Hey, I made it to Mr. Murphy's pottery studio. Oh my gosh, look at all of this great artwork and pottery that he has displayed everywhere. I'm really excited for the pottery class that I'm going to take. Hey, Mr. Mitchell, I'm here and I'm ready to get started." Right? There was so much more description that was so much more accessible. And all I had to do was build it in organically to what I said during the narration. Um, and then if you have something like a story or other disappearing content where you can't add captions, make sure that you've got a text summary of it somewhere. That's applicable, especially in certain social media. So those accessible social media posts. I want to make sure that I put alt text for every single image. It is always best practice to also add a visible image description in the caption. That's helpful because some people with low vision don't use text software. They just simply zoom in. So they won't have a reading software that can find that alternative text description. It might also be someone with a cognitive difference who benefits from reading the description because how their brain simply processes visual things is different than how someone else's brain might process it. We want to be very careful that we do not have any flashing or blinking content in our video or in our PowerPoints or in anything else because that can cause a seizure. So we want to be very careful that we avoid that. Um, we would want to only use videos that have good captions. When we are posting, if it is a mention or a link or a hashtag, they all go at the end of our post, not in and amongst the post. So if I have anybody that I want to mention, if I want to link, if I want to do a whole bunch of hashtags, I'm going to do that at the end, not in the paragraph of my post. And if I'm using hashtags, I want to use what's called Pascal case, where the first letter of every word in my hashtag is capitalized. Um, Emojis have alternative text built in already. You do not need to put it in, it's already there. However, let's not use emojis instead of a word. Here's why. The alternative text for emojis is not like clearly stated anywhere, and certain social media platforms use different alternative text. So imagine if I had the emoji with the really big frown on it. Um, Instead of, and that to me might mean sad. Well, what if the actual alternative text that's hidden behind there for that social media platform is something like depressed? Well, that's a much stronger word, and that may or may not be what I mean. So I want to still use the word and then the emoji. um, when we're building things like accessibility into our workflows, any kind of digital software, third-party software, vendor software that we use, let's not purchase it or sign a contract until we ask them for their VPAT or ACR. VPAT is a voluntary product accessibility template. ACR is their accessibility conformance report. And many times those are one in the same document. Those are free templated documents that are available online. If a software company and their product is a digital thing, in other words, people are going to interact with it digitally, um, and they say, "Oh, I don't have one," say, "Well, then we were going to need you to fill one out and get it back to us." Or we're going to need you to give us other evidentiary information about how you are 100% compliant with WCAG 2.1 level double A, because that is the legal standard. So I want to know how you comply with that and how you guarantee it before I sign or before I renew my contract. If it is something that produces PDFs as part of that software, I also want to know how they ensure that the PDFs that are created through that software are PDF/UA compliant. And I want that in writing before I sign anything. I want to make sure I'm collaborating with leadership and creating that digital access action plan. If you do not have individuals internally that can help you create that or do things like an audit, there are companies who can. GrackleDocs happens to be one of them. We're not the only one. I am a bit biased. But there are resources out there. We also do full human web audits. Human web audits are the only way to get a fully accurate web audit to assess your website's accessibility. There are tools that will scan your website. Any automated checker for a website or a document right now on the market is currently no better than 30% accurate. So just be mindful of that. Doesn't mean you don't use them. 30% is better than nothing. But you need to just kind of be aware that if it says, oh, this is fine, that report is only 30% accurate. When you make a document, use the built-in accessibility checker. Know that they're there as a tool and they are not perfect. So invest in digital accessibility training if you think you need it. Avoid ambiguous hyperlinks like click here. Use descriptive text. Use a color contrast checker. If you're going to use that Grackle Go, our free PDF checking tool, when you sign up for access to that, you will also get free access to our color contrast checker. Free, unlimited, forever access. Um, Make sure you build buy-in. So you are essential personnel. You're communication professionals within the government. Your role in this is crucial and critical. What we want to do is change focus from something being a burden to being an opportunity. We have an opportunity to fundamentally support the civil rights of an entire population of our community and to remove systemic barriers that have been in place for decades. And it's one that we can capitalize on. It's one that we need to collaborate with everyone else in our organization to do. It is not something that's going to be done overnight. It is a marathon and not a sprint, and that is okay. Thank you all for tuning in, and thanks everyone for being here. Have a great rest of your day and a great week.